Today, we're welcoming merger Kai Goodall to the podcast. Kai got his start at the Knowledge Society, a STEM accelerator program for teens, where he discovered his love for propulsion tech and rocket science. At just 16 years old, he landed a job where he helped design satellites at Telesat, Canada's largest satellite company. Today, Kai tells us about his approach to learning, cold emailing experts on LinkedIn, and the impact a grant from 1517 Fund had on his most recent project. Enjoy. Hey, Kai, awesome to have you here. I've been seeing you on my Twitter timeline, on my LinkedIn, getting your updates. You've been working on some really, really crazy stuff for the past few years. I'd love to jump right in and maybe turn back the clock, rewind to the first moments that you realize hey, I want to go down the path that you're currently on now, and what was happening in your life at that time.
Yeah, so I mean, it's absolutely great to be here. Before I did all of this tech stuff, all of this entrepreneurship stuff, I was very much so a hardcore musician. I spent about 3 hours every day practicing. I was on three instruments, and it was sort of what I was doing with all of my time. And after the pandemic, I realized that with all of these instruments, I wasn't practicing enough and dedicated enough to reach the cream of the crop that's able to find success within the instruments. But I was practicing enough that I was above the beginner level, and I was sort of in this intermediate area where I wasn't able to find any real meaningful success, but I was still investing a huge amount of time into it. And I decided that I sort of wanted to make a shift away from music and more towards something that I could see as being more helpful to myself and something that I would be able to grow more in. So I joined this program called the Knowledge Society, and that sort of kicked off my entrepreneurship tech experience. And while I was at the Knowledge Society, built a bunch of cool projects, got a bunch of cool mentorship, and most importantly, I got a sense of what tech could be, what the passionate entrepreneurship and being scrappy looked like. And I fell in love. And ever since then, I've just been trying to build as many cool projects in as many fields as I possibly can.
Maybe if it's cool with you, we can talk a little bit about sort of the precursor to TKS, the Knowledge Society, and kind of that time when you were doing all of this music. I'm a musician. I also discovered technology and sort of moved away from music, at least as a vocation, to focusing on on tech. What was the thing that kind of got you interested in music in the first place? And maybe are there any sort of overlaps around creativity that you see and sort of like moving away from music to technology?
Yeah, so I mean, when I was very young, my parents made me play piano. I think this is a story that's pretty common, and I was never that big of a fan of it. But when I was in grade four, I picked the flute because my parents were like, I was moving to a new school, and my parents made me try a new instrument so I would fit into the bands there. And I was never that big of a fan of the flute either. But when the pandemic started, I had so much free time on my hand, and I finally decided that I wanted to do something that I chose. So I decided to take up the saxophone. It was definitely a lot to be doing all at the same time, but I was more passionate about the saxophone, and I put way more effort and way more time and energy into it. And after a first year or so, I was already at a decently competitive level. It was the pandemic, so there was no competitions going on, and it was just very much so an internal motivation to keep on pushing myself to be better and better and learn harder pieces. And I really did enjoy it. But I definitely think that there came a point where I maybe didn't enjoy it quite as much, where I was investing all of this energy into playing these harder and harder and these more technical pieces. I saw my saxophone teacher, who he was a student himself, and he spent every day just like 6 to 8 hours only practicing, and he didn't have much of a social life outside of it. It was always he would be practicing the instrument and then transcribing music and then trying to do the next thing. And I realized that if I wanted to go into music, I would have to, it would be have to only be only music and nothing else. And I wanted to have a more uh, diverse set of what I was interested in and a more diverse set of what I did. So I sort of took a step away from music. Uh, and that's about the time when I joined the Knowledge Society.
I'm curious. This seems to be a common thread with a lot of people in our sort of age group that I've spoken with. Obviously, the pandemic was, a pretty dark time for most people on the planet. But at the same time, I think for some people, it offered the kind of space and time to maybe explore certain directions that wouldn't have been explored otherwise. At least that was the case for myself. Prior to the pandemic, did you have any inkling that you would be going in this STEM and aerospace and all of that stuff that you're working on now in that direction?
I mean, I've always been a huge fan of engineering and space, and I think it all sort of started from there's this book called What If by Randall Munro. This former NASA roboticist who quit his job to write the XKCD webcomic. He wrote this big book about answering these super absurd, super crazy questions in extreme scientific detail. And when I saw that, it was just the coolest thing to me. And ever since then, I sort of knew that I wanted to go down some sort of engineering or science pathway. But it wasn't really until the pandemic that I was able to explore what that meant a little bit more and refine what I was interested in.
Do you recall any particular sort of what ifs from that book that really resonated with you?
Oh, there's so many interesting ones. I love there's so many little tidbits of humor. There's one where uh, the question was about what would happen if a baseball was accelerated to 90% the speed of light. Long story short, it fuses with the air molecules and essentially creates a massive nuclear explosion that blows up half the city that the baseball diamond's in. And then the last line in the entire answer is that according to a certain baseball rule, it would be qualified as hit by pitch, and the batter would be eligible to move up to first base, which is now incinerated in a big crater.
Pretty good. Maybe tell us a little bit about TKS. I know that some people will probably have heard of it. Other people won't have heard of it here. What is TKS? What was that experience like? What was the thing that actually caused you to, apply for it in the first place?
I learned about TKS through a friend of mine at school. Both of our parents worked together, and my dad was telling me about this program that my friend from school was in that he was really interested in. And he encouraged me to apply. And I did a bit of research and I looked into it, and it seemed like the kind of thing that I'd be really interested in. And then I applied, I got in, and it's definitely not what I was originally expecting. I thought it was going to be some sort of like the idea behind TKS is that they provide Olympic level coaching to high schoolers to allow them to create real world impact instead of focusing all their time and energy into getting good grades or winning a science fair. And I was expecting it to be a lot more instruction and a lot more coaching and a lot more handouts. But what I wasn't really expecting and what I almost wasn't prepared for was that in TKS, everything that you learned on your own. You were pushed to teach yourself how to reach out to people. I remember on the first day, I don't want to spoil it for anybody who's just going in, but we all made a presentation and we all had slides and we were said who was going to say which slides. And then when it was time to present, Damien, the director, said, all right, only one person's allowed to present, because in the real world, you never have 5 people doing a presentation. And then we all had to frantically scramble to see who was going to present the thing. But there's a lot of that sort of same idea that continued throughout TKS, where we have these beliefs, we have these understandings that equip us to perform well in a school system, but the school system isn't real life. There's a lot of learning how to perform well in real life after the school system, and learning what can give you the most unique advantages that other people your age won't have.
I'm sure Ari has some interesting sort of thoughts and examples on this too, but maybe it would be interesting and instructive to share a few examples of things where the world is just so much different than school, right? And sort of what you expect in school and the way you act in school. People who are listening to this, they might be like, they're in school right now, or they just left school and they're kind of maybe acclimating or getting ready to acclimate to a new environment. Maybe share a few of those sort of like counterintuitive things where it's like, wow, this is kind of a 180 from what we experienced or expected based on our school experience.
Yeah, I mean, at least for me in high school, there was very much so a culture of, as a student, you sort of have to sit down, shut up, and listen to the teacher talk, and uh, not question what the teacher says. But in TKS, there's a lot more of an encouragement to question everything, and there's this mindset that you learn called boss mentality, which is essentially that your time and your presence is as valuable as anyone else who you're speaking to, no more nor less. So instead of being timid and sitting at the back of the class, uh, it encouraged me to, if I didn't know about something, if I wanted to learn more, I would talk to my teacher after class, or even I would reach out to a professor at a different university who's an expert on the subject and book a meeting to better understand the topic and just follow my curiosities that way.
Yeah, I think that that is like completely something that I picked up on too in my time at TKS. Just realizing that, in the real world, no one is going to like walk up to you and say, "Hey, like what can I help you with?" If you want to speak with that professor, or you want to get that job, or you want to raise that funding, like you need to make the space and actually go out and present yourself. And yeah, that was huge. In TKS, I definitely explored many different paths in STEM. It was the first time that I was sort of opening up my mind to more technical topics. I'm curious, when you were in TKS, did you use that time to like explore every single sort of focus area that they were offering, or were you going into it really with your eye on one area?
I mean, I would say that in TKS, I definitely didn't. If I were to do it again, there are things I would have changed. I sort of fell for the flashiness of AI. It seemed like the coolest thing, and then ChatGPT came out, and it seemed like it would be a poor decision to not keep doing AI. But my passion wasn't really in it, and I wasn't really that interested in the actual work. I was more focused on the flashy things the outcome could bring. And so, in that way, I didn't. I was investing most of my time on my project work into something I wasn't really that interested in, but then I would always procrastinate and go on side tangents by researching other technologies. I realized at one point that I was spending hours, instead of doing my AI work, just reading astrophysics papers, and I'm like, I think this is a sign that I should be switching over to if I'm procrastinating by doing something that's could be productive, maybe that's what I should be doing with my main time. And then in the second year program, uh, I do think I explore my interests a lot more, and I fell on rocketry and rocket science, which I found really interesting, and I've sort of stuck with that ever since.
We should get into the rocketry stuff and kind of what you're doing there now, what you've done in the past, what you want to do in the future. But before we do, I think that there might be a really interesting sort of meta lesson for folks when it comes to how to think about spending your time and how to think about focusing versus exploring. It seems like you had a little bit of a lesson that you shared there around how maybe you might have done things a little bit differently, how you were kind of lured to maybe the popular thing or the flashy thing a little bit. But do you have any other thoughts about sort of like the explore phase versus like the, okay, I found the thing that I really want to do that's pulling me and I should just really make that my focus? Any advice for folks who might be going through sort of a similar situation?
I mean, I think that in general, we have so much more time than we think we do, just because we spend so much time so poorly. To me, it's less of a question of, is it better to explore or is it better to be building? And I think it's more of a question of, am I spending my time productively? And at the end of the day, I think that the difference you get from exploring versus building is very minimal compared to the difference you get between doing either of those versus just doom scrolling on TikTok. As soon as you can, if you can get off these apps, if you can start consuming content that's more interesting, or creating content on your own, building, even if it's maybe not the area that you're going to choose in the end, maybe even if it's not the most interesting thing to you, you're going to be drastically more successful, and you're going to have a higher chance of landing on something that you want to build in, if you're just off of these time suck doom scrolling apps.
And so tell us now, like What about rocketry excites you? What area of rocketry you're focused on, and like how you actually got started?
Yeah, no, rocketry is it's so fascinating to me. I'm most interested in propulsion systems. That's sort of in my mind where the heart of rocketry is. It's the uh, how do we make the rocket spit out the most material as fast as possible to make the most thrust and get these rockets into the sky. I mean, I've always had an interest in rocketry from afar, but it was this year that I started actually learning the science, putting everything together. I would do deep dives onto the history of rocketry and even built a couple rockets on my own. But in terms of where my passion for rocketry was really honed in, I spent 6 months at the beginning of the year helping design satellites at Telesat in Ottawa. And while I was there, I was able to work on and collaborate with a bunch of teams. And I always found that I I was most passionate about the work that the people on the propulsion teams were doing, and I thought that that was the most interesting, as opposed to the network engineers or the hardware engineers. I always thought that the people who were specifically working on propulsion just had the coolest job to me. And I sort of reflected on that and thought, this wasn't what I thought I was going to go into. But if I'm consistently just so enamored by these rocketry jobs, maybe this is meant for me. Maybe this is a better fit.
You said you spent 6 months working with this company. I'm assuming it was working with a lot of people who were much older than you, had much more industry experience. How did you get that opportunity? Like, what was that like, and what was it like getting started?
Yeah, no, it was very much so far from what I had been expecting. I I was able to get myself the opportunity to visit the office and tour the facilities and check out uh, what the place looked like, what it was like to work in an aerospace company that was focusing on space. And, from there, I was like, oh my gosh, this is a dream come true. What can I do to work here? And I managed to get the contact information of the right person to talk to, and I basically sent over a message saying, hey, I'd love to spend some time helping you in whatever way I could this summer. Here's my portfolio. I mean, I think that they like my portfolio enough to uh, find a position where I could add some value. And it was definitely not what I expected. It was very much so a lot of learning, not even in the technical aspects, and just what it's like to work in an office and exist in this space with all of these senior people and all of these highly technical people. But from there, I gave it my all and then some. I had about 1 month as the original contract term full time over the summer, and I worked so hard that before the first week was done, I had completed all of the work that my boss was expecting me to do in the whole 1 month. I mean, they were so impressed, and I was such a passionate hard worker that they were like, "Let's bring this kid on part time."
That's amazing. Can you speak a little bit to? I'd be personally very interested in this, and I'm guessing other people would be as well. The portfolio stuff. Was that something that you kind of like were consciously creating a portfolio of work? Is it just like you happened to pursue all these interesting ideas and projects that were sort of related, and then you just sort of they kind of coalesced into a document where you could kind of showcase the work that you've done? I think that sometimes people just try to put together a portfolio as like a means to an end. You don't seem like that type of person. So maybe speak a little bit to a little bit to sort of like what those projects were like and how they kind of coalesced into ultimately this like essentially this proof of work that showed that you were somebody who people should take seriously and give a shot to work at a pretty significant company.
Yeah, I mean, I had first, I think that I want to get it on the record that I think resume padding in general is stupid. And I think that those people who take 1,000 co-curriculars and try and be the school captain or whatever just to have something fancy on a resume, they end up disappearing into a sea of all these other people who are trying to just pad out their
Totally.
resume. So I don't think that it's ever a wise idea to take on a project for the sole purpose of having something to put on a resume or in a portfolio. But that being said, I would be lying if I said that I didn't have the marketability of something to put into a portfolio on my mind in part when I was deciding what projects to pursue. It was definitely one of the factors that I considered. At the end of the day, it was just what projects do I want to build, what projects are ambitious, and what projects am I passionate about. And I think that the most important thing for me was building projects that demonstrated that I was ambitious and that I was very good at solving problems. And that's sort of what they hired me on at Telesat for. I wasn't the most technical person there, but I was someone who could work fast and iterate quickly and understand something from zero to a functional understanding in just a day or two. Building those projects that demonstrated that. I know there was one project that specifically stood out to the person who was interviewing me, where I proposed this technology that would fit into a pair of glasses that would use a bunch of fancy brain-computer interface technology to suppress cravings for opioids. And at the end of the day, the technology wouldn't actually fit into the form factor of a pair of glasses. There was technical and financial limitations, and it didn't actually fit the objectives of the project. But the ambition and the problem solving and the fact that I was able to identify this problem that I cared about and create some sort of theoretically at least effective solution was something that they really enjoyed, and they really thought that I'd be able to carry those skills over to my work at Telesat.
Super cool. Something that I've heard Julian speak a lot about in the past is how founders, working in these technical fields, are often facing the question of, I want to work in this space, I want to create the solution, and what is the best way of going about that? Is it starting my own company? Is it joining someone else's? How do you think about, having worked at Telesat, a relatively large company? How do you think about going forward, actually achieving the kinds of solutions that you're wanting to build?
I think that it's very easy to fall into status games, and it's very attractive to do whichever seems fanciest to your friends, whichever the people will be congratulating you the most for. I mean, everybody's going to be super impressed if you're an intern at Tesla, but if you start your own battery company, people are going to be impressed too. People aren't going to be as impressed if you're working for a larger company and building different skills that aren't as flashy or cool. So I think that for me, it's more of a question of, if I want to accomplish this grand goal, if I want to move towards this grand success, what is the step that I can take now that is most effective at moving towards that? And in my case, it's very hard to, in the space industry at least, it's very hard to get anything that's worth talking about without working with a large company, just because rockets are so expensive, and all of this stuff there's a huge barrier for entry. But in terms of like software development, I would definitely say that pursuing your own projects where you can be more ambitious and you have less constraints seems like the much more viable option. I think it's a question of how can you make the most impact regardless of what looks the flashiest and what seems the coolest.
Totally, totally. And so I know that you're based in Ottawa right now. Telesat is a Canadian company. It's interesting to hear about sort of the differences, the Waterloo and maybe the Ottawa tech ecosystems versus, San Francisco or Austin, especially when it comes to, rocketry and stuff like that. Where do you see yourself heading next, geographically and otherwise?
Yeah, I mean, I'm attending Waterloo next year, so I'm going to be there for a little while I'm getting my degree. Geographically, I think that in the space industry, it's definitely very complicated and limited, just because of all of these legal regulations that essentially push all rocket companies to have their headquarters in America or be at a huge disadvantage otherwise. And as such, it's less of an option and more of a partial requirement for me to live in the United States if I want to work at any of these serious, big, impactful companies, with notable exceptions like Rocket Lab in New Zealand or a bunch of the European companies. But even then, Rocket Lab's headquarters are still in California. So in terms of geography, I would love to eventually at some point be living in California and working on some big, maybe working for SpaceX in LA or Rocket Lab or one of those major companies. But there's definitely a long path between where I am today and where I will be at that point, and who knows what will happen along the way.
Well, I know we'd be very lucky to have you in California. So hopefully you're out here sooner rather than later, but it sounds like it's only a matter of time. Before we go, maybe we can talk a little bit about sort of your experience working on projects and receiving grants for them. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about sort of the project that you're working on that you got a grant for and sort of what that process was like of getting a grant. And then we can talk maybe a little bit about like what it meant to receive a grant, sort of how you utilized it, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I'm currently working on designing my own fluid propelled engine, just a small one to learn the fundamentals of rocketry, and uh, it's hoping to produce enough thrust to maybe push a skateboard, but nothing more than that. So it's not some big, complex, high-tech machinery. But even still, the parts and the components are very expensive, and there's a lot of tools that I need to get. So I received the Medici grant from 1517 Fund, which is 1,000 United States dollars, and that was able to kick off my project and give me the not only funds to make it real, but also some sort of social proof, some sort of validation that I was able to, once it has funding, it's a lot more of a real project and a lot less of just an idea. And I was able to even leverage this to get meetings and grow my mentor network to learn the skills that better allowed me to work on the project and grow the project as fast as possible. And then additionally, I also have a project that's trying to reduce poverty in Tanzania by providing access to motorcycles. And right now, the team and I are in the process of getting a grant for that as well. So having that first grant sets you up with a level of reliability. These other grant programs know that you're someone who other people will trust to give a grant to, and it gives you a sense and understanding of what the experience is like. So it's always a little bit easier the second time around.
Totally. And we'll let you go in a second, but for those watching who maybe are unfamiliar with 1517's Medici grant process, I think a lot of people have this idea in their head of these huge academic grants. What was the process for you? The application, the interview? Did they send you the money via PayPal? Like, what was that process?
I think that the 1517 Medici grant program is definitely one of the best grant programs out there because it's completely no strings attached. I sent them an email saying that I had this idea and I wanted a grant to be able to pursue this idea further. I got a response. We hopped on a call, chatted for a bit, and then a week later, I received a check in the mail. And it was, it was simple as that. It was, I knew I had the money before the end of the call, and uh, there was really no complication, no strings attached. It was one of the I've had regular meetings with people who I was just trying to have a conversation with be more complicated than that.
Well, Kai, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the Merge podcast. It's so awesome to have you in the community. And yeah, really excited to see what you do with the skateboard, sort of create a real rocket power. And really excited, hopefully to see you IRL at some point, either in California or Canada or somewhere else.
Absolutely, yeah. No, I'm super glad to be on the podcast, and if all goes well, who knows? Maybe seeing you IRL this summer.
Awesome.